All right, YouTube, there are yet more woes at the Fukushima plant. I know woes is sort of the buzzword about the plant. There are a couple of new developments. One is extremely alarming, and that's that there's actually a typhoon, tropical storm, not necessarily typhoon strength. They call them typhoons, we call them hurricanes. There's some difference in the weather patterns, or maybe it's just regional. I'm not sure what the difference is. But this rather large storm is slated to hit Japan tomorrow. It's actually right next to Japan now. Like the outer bands are just approaching the southern edge of Japan. The Tokyo region is, of course, near the south. Fukushima is further north. It's going to hit the south edge tonight, and it's supposed to travel across Japan sort of at a curved angle. And the forecast is for 15 inches of rain in the Fukushima area. The winds are almost 100 miles an hour right now from this storm. What happens to a severely damaged set of buildings that are already unstable? They're on unstable ground because it's been inundated with water. What happens if 15 inches of rainfall in a short span of 4 or 5 hours? What happens to these cranes and these towers that are already damaged beyond repair when 100-mile-an-hour winds hit them? What happens to a nuclear power plant that's literally right next to the shore when waves start crashing into it? You couldn't ask for much of a worse situation than what's literally about to happen tonight and tomorrow in Japan, in the Fukushima area. Of course, Fukushima is basically right at sea level. It's a few feet above. The land is raised slightly, but the entire area is going to be completely washed by flooding, potentially. There are mountains in back of the Fukushima area, and it's right on the shore at a low elevation. There's mountains all along Japan. It's a very mountainous nation. All that water hits those mountains and gets funneled down into the valleys, especially in the coastal regions. What happens if a torrent of water, thousands and thousands and thousands and millions and trillions of gallons of water just come gushing down those mountains right through the power plant? It's an apocalyptic scenario because the problem is this. Even if the water and the wind and these things don't damage the buildings, that's not the only issue. What happens if it destroys the power generation systems that TEPCO is using to pump water into the plants? Because this rain, I'm not sure that these plants have enough. I believe they're still intact in the sense that rain from the outside isn't going to enter the buildings, and that they're piping this water through the walls, through closed pipe systems. Well, that rain's not going to help cool the cores. If the pump systems stop working, all that's going to happen is that all of this seawater stagnates in there during the duration of the storm. You could potentially also have workers cut off from the area for days or even weeks if the whole area gets flooded out the right way. The water stagnates, it gets more and more radioactive, and slowly heats up and turns to steam, blowing the top off the building, potentially, and then you have a meltdown. There's the issue of the spent fuel rods. One of these buildings, literally on the roof, has a pool containing spent fuel rods that are in water to keep them from igniting. Well, if this building were to collapse, then all of these fuel rods would just be scattered around the whole area. Some of them might be literally lying on the ground emitting radiation. You literally couldn't have a worse situation. The only thing that would dwarf the possibility of this typhoon shutting off power or damaging one of these buildings further or flooding the area and cutting people off so they can't monitor the site would be a massive earthquake and tsunami like caused the meltdown in the first place. There's also this other, and by the way, link in the description for all of this info. There's also another story from 2 days ago. Steam spotted it, and this is in the description, steam spotted at Fukushima nuclear reactor. Apparently the water on the roof of one of these buildings, I can't remember which one, is starting to turn to steam. That indicates a rise in temperature. A rise in temperature in this situation indicates a rise in radiation. The radiation does create heat. It's energetic. It puts out heat. If you were to touch a fuel rod, you'd probably be quite warm, I would assume. And yet they're saying, oh, well, it has no, well, our radiation meters haven't shown any increase in radiation. But just until about 2 weeks ago, they kept telling us that it was that the radiation had stayed more or less stable. Then we find out they weren't using the proper equipment, and it was actually 18 times higher than that because they weren't using the right equipment. If any of us needed a reason to question our governments and to question business right now, look at Fukushima. They've been caught out in lie after lie about this site. Right now, there is radioactive milk being sold on the west coast of the United States because although it wasn't a large amount of fallout, there was fallout across the western half of the United States as a result of the first meltdown at Fukushima. Now, it's not going to really hurt adults. It's too low a level. It's higher than it should be. It's an elevated level. Media blackout, they haven't reported it. Probably not to cause panic. It's not going to give, people, instant cancer or anything like that, but milk is, who drinks the most milk? Small children, who are more susceptible to damage by radiation. So between the escalation, between the steam coming off these buildings, which shows there must be some sort of buildup of heat, and the fact that a typhoon is about to slam into that region, now it could divert, it could go off into the ocean, it could go to the other side and never hit that part of Japan. It could weaken drastically and dump much less rain and have much less wind. That would be the best case scenario, but right now their forecast literally says, by the way, Fukushima area, there's going to be 15 inches of rain. That's a hell of a lot of rain when you get, and we saw it here in Vermont. Here's some anecdotal material. When you see a hurricane go through the deep south, the land is more flat than it is up here, so it doesn't cause as much damage, usually. The wind does, the water doesn't. Here in Vermont is kind of like Japan. We've got a lot of mountains and very narrow valleys between them where most people live. The problem with that scenario is when that much rain hits the area, it gets funneled rather quickly because the ground can't take it up, the plants can't take it up quickly enough. It gets funneled into the valleys, it swells the rivers to many times their normal size. You get roads out, you get homes destroyed or damaged, you get people getting washed away in this muddy mix of torrential water. This could very well happen to the Fukushima area. Look at it on Google Maps. There's a rather large mountain chain extending down all of Japan. And on the coastal areas, you have this relatively narrow strip of developed land. And even near the coast, there are hills, which are covered in trees usually. But there are hills there too. Those funnel water also. When rain falls that quickly, it's not being absorbed. It's just going off whatever way is the path of least resistance. What you have is a situation where even if the buildings at Fukushima aren't directly damaged, you could have roads out that prevent engineers from getting there to make sure the system's up and running. What are they going to do? Fly a helicopter into a severely compromised, highly radioactive zone and have to literally copter these workers in and out if the roads go awry? What are they going to do? What happens if these waves come crashing up on shore and damage the buildings further? It's gotten to the point where there are spots in Fukushima, and this isn't alarmist, this is true. There are areas in Fukushima that are so radioactive now, even to the area outside of the buildings and outside of these hundreds and hundreds of storage tanks, that it's highly risky for an individual to even be in that area, even wearing protective gear for any great period of time. What happens if that radiation level continues to rise? They also came out and admitted what everyone who was astute and observant already knew, but the Japanese government and TEPCO kept saying it wasn't so, that all of this water that is supposedly being contained by that wall they built is actually going right into the ocean because, oh, by the way, two months earlier it started sloshing over that barrier, but we didn't tell you until now. And there's yet another problem. The corium, well, 3 coriums actually, these melted blobs of nuclear material, appear to have undergone what they call straight to China syndrome. That's when a corium, which is a superheated, liquefied blob of nuclear material that's melted down from a reactor, has eaten through the steel plating. We know it's melted through the steel plating that was supposed to keep it from doing so. It appears to have melted through the concrete flooring underneath the reactor as well. I think it was something, I can't remember whether it was 5 inches or 5 feet of solid concrete. It ate through it. It's now descending through the ground and will continue to do so potentially until it gets back into the core of the earth. And they're not going to be able to extract it. So when they wonder why there's higher radioactivity coming off the site from underground water, it's because the corium has hit groundwater. The slowly flowing groundwater is literally washing over the corium, creating steam. Well, it can't create steam when it's underground. Well, maybe it can. Let's just ignore that. But basically, the groundwater is washing over the corium before it goes to the ocean, and it's It's very radioactive. This is liquefied nuclear material. This is sort of like the elephant's foot at Chernobyl. By the way, people who have actually gotten near the elephant's foot say they can literally feel a tingling sensation from it. That's how radioactive it is. Um, Words cannot describe the terror that might be felt by the Japanese people if they have a repeat meltdown, especially with the spent fuel rod containment area. Let's look at some population statistics and see why the rest of the world should worry. And I just put this on a notepad file. There are 127 million people in Japan. Presumably, in a complete meltdown scenario, with the wind going the right way, most of those people would have to leave Japan. That means you're creating over 100 million refugees. Where are they going to go? Korea, South Korea, because Korea, by the way, would probably get hit with a significant dose too. 50 million more people. Taiwan, which isn't far from that region, 23 million more. What about the peripheral areas that may or may not get hit with a lot of fallout, but would at least get something? What about Indonesia with 237 million people? Other than the main island, none of them are really that wide. Any radiation is just, it's not going to bounce off the mountains magically and go back into the ocean. Australia, north coast of Australia might get hit. There are millions of people there. Chile, this is something most people haven't thought about. The nation of Chile is very long and thin. It looks like a hot pepper, like a cayenne pepper. It's got almost no width to it at all. It's just basically this large coastal region of the Pacific in South America. There are 15 million people in Chile. Where are they going to go? Because they're certainly going to get a lot of fallout. Peru, Ecuador, Panama, all these countries along that region. What about coastal China? What about California, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, and coastal Canada? British Columbia. What about Mexico? Baja California. These are all areas that are going to get dosed in fallout if this happens. There are people who have literally talked about the amount of radioactive material being high enough that the entire northern hemisphere, from the entire hemisphere, that means Europe too, Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, Russia, Central Asia, could get at least moderate fallout from this. And yet the mainstream media says basically nothing. It's on Time that the steam was spotted, and Time's talking about it. There are a few mainstream media sources that have paid lip service to the story briefly, but there's basically a tropical storm headed right towards a damaged nuclear reactor that's sitting there already damaged, and nobody gives a shit. What happens, again, what happens if we have a complete meltdown? You got many tons of nuclear material get spewed up into the sky. Japan would be depopulated. Anyone who didn't die would have to leave. And probably most of them would die. You'd have literally tens of millions of corpses littering the streets of Tokyo. And they're saying the corium probably already is feeding radioactivity into the Tokyo aquifer, which is another problem. So we'll wait and see what happens with this typhoon, or if an earthquake hits the region, or something else happens, but it doesn't. Right now, the Fukushima situation has gone from at first mildly troubling to then quite alarming to now, I wonder if I should move to Argentina because I wonder if I'm going to get a huge dose of fallout just being anywhere in the northern hemisphere. No, I like Vermont, but I don't think I want to live like Fallout 3, even though the idea is kind of cool on paper. I don't really want to be ghoulified, and I don't really want to have to, take Rad-X all day, because it sounds like it would suck. But really, people are severely underestimating the risk at this plant. You can see it with the media, you can see it with the government. Anyone who trusts the government of Japan right now with their official storyline, they must have something wrong with them. Anyone who trusts TEPCO right now must have something severely wrong with them. This is not a situation that can be underestimated. This is a severe environmental catastrophe, first to the environment. Second, of course, cost. Third, simply just look at the number of lives that could be lost. Catastrophic numbers of people could die. Chernobyl would be nothing compared to what would happen if a plant that close to Tokyo, started spewing out radioactive ash. It would be a nightmare. These refugees, what would happen to the refugees? Where would they go? Are we going to put them all in FEMA camps and have, 50 million Japanese people interned there, like during World War II? What's going to happen to these people? Where else can they go? Except for the United States and Canada and a few other places that are capable of potentially evacuating large numbers of people in a short span of time. You're looking literally at the world's worst nightmare, and certainly the end of nuclear power, as used by any nation of any means that's capable of shutting down its plants and providing power in any other manner. Peace out.